All right, welcome back to the show. I hope you caught the first segment of this episode. This is actually going to be a multi-part episode. I'm just going to name it part one, part two, and all of that. Part one, my co-host and I, Warren Reinerson, we discussed the presidential run and all of that for 2024. We talked about Biden, we talked about Trump, we talked about foreign policy. And I think towards the end, we more pivoted towards the foreign policy mess ups of Biden so far, and the foreign policy success of Trump. We're going to move forward now and talk more about the presidential run, but we're going to talk more about the candidates themselves. Probably in this case, less about the foreign geopolitics and more of the national and candidate quality. So, Warren, do you want to start us off with some commentary on that?
Yeah, so the candidates in this particular election are actually quite unique, and I'm not just saying that because because Joe Biden himself is in it again. Even though Joe Biden's not exactly a unique candidate. I mean, he's ran for president like four, including this time he's ran for president like four times. But what makes this election unique is one of the other candidates is a former president of the United States. That hasn't happened since I think since 1936 or something. We also have the nephew of a former president also in the run, and which I don't think again has happened ever. I know we've had the grandson of a former president running, and the cousin of one, and that's about it. Sorry, and the son. Yeah, forgot about George W. Bush there for a second. And right. We also have one of the most popular and controversial governors in modern history, who's not technically in the running yet, but most people are saying he is going to start to run. So, I mean, I'm just going to start going in order. I think with Biden himself, I don't think he's a very good quality candidate. I'm not saying this because I don't like the guy. I mean, I'm sure he's a fine person, but his age is a very serious problem. I mean, the guy's almost in his the guy's by the time he leaves office, he's going to be in his early to mid 80s. Granted, Trump won't be much younger if he enters office again.
But won't he be in his 80s once he finishes this 4-year term if he were to be reelected?
Yes, he will be. No. The key difference, though, is Trump would be leaving office in his 80s. Biden would still be in office. And he would be almost 90 when he retires if he gets a second term.
Yeah.
So now Trump would only be able to serve one term though, and now the reason why that's a bit of a problem, other than the physical capacity to do the job, is the mental capacity as well. Now I'm sure we covered this a lot I'm sure we covered this quite a bit on the show before, but I'm just gonna put it this way. Biden, not exactly mentally all there. Like for reference of how bad his mind is starting to go. A few weeks ago, he was talking about his grandfather who died. He said he died in the same hospital Biden was born in, just 2 weeks before Biden was born. There are some serious problems with that. For one, Joe Biden's grandfather died in Baltimore. Baltimore is in Maryland. Joe Biden himself was born in Pennsylvania. His grandfather also died in 1941. Joe Biden was born in November of 1942.
Yep.
So keep in mind, this isn't like he's not just making the story. He honestly doesn't seem like he can remember even basic things about his own family like that, and that's a serious issue for a person like me looking into it.
Yeah, and real quick, not to cut you off, but real quick, there's science that says that ice cream helps patients with Alzheimer's. And so he eats a lot of ice cream. That's actually one of the markers of his presidency and how the media handles him with kid gloves, and they just talk about his ice cream. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream rather than, geopolitical important stuff. They just ask him softball questions, but he's always eating a lot of ice cream. this could be related to his either dementia or his Alzheimer's, which he may or may not have, which he is exhibiting some signs of having. And so those are just they're indicators. How definitive of an indicator they are, it's debatable, but even that is, I think, enough to help question his capacity and his ability to run as the president.
Yeah. And that's certainly think that should be considered. Now, granted, Biden himself doesn't think that's a problem. Well, keep in mind that's Biden himself talking. It's not exactly an unbiased source there. Now, but what we seem to have an issue. The other thing that Biden seems to have an issue with is just staying focused, because he seems to be falling asleep a lot while he's on the job. Not like if he occasionally fall asleep during a cabinet meeting, I could kind of understand that. I mean, let's face it, everyone here has fallen asleep in class or doing a boring event at least once. Like, I remember once I was watching a debate at a tournament, and I actually fell asleep in the audience because I was just that bored.
Yeah.
And this is something I was doing competitively at the time. But it seems like he's just dozing off at random times, and that's not exactly a good sign for the president of the United States. Now, moving on and also Biden has said a lot of pretty racist things throughout his life, even while he was running for president. Like he even made racist comments about Barack Obama before Obama won the Democratic nomination.
Yep.
So, yeah, not granted, it is possible Biden didn't actually mean any of those things, or he didn't mean to say they came out completely wrong. Yeah, I can understand that. That happens. I mean, I've said some things that didn't come out quite right, and it ended up sounding way more offensive than I intended it.
Yeah.
But compare that to Trump. I mean, now Trump is also getting up there in age. He would be, I think, 79 entering his second term and then leaving office at 83. So compare that to Biden. If Biden got a second term, he'd be leaving office at 87.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now Trump, even though he's up there in age, he still seems to be mentally there. He just, he says dumb things a lot. I mean, every person says dumb things. But at least he can put together a coherent sentence, and he could actually tell people what he's thinking.
Yeah, well, at least when Trump says something dumb, it's not a mistake.
Yeah.
He says it, and he stands behind what he says. But with Biden, he says he says incoherent things. I think Don't Walk Run Productions has done a pretty good job of cataloging and showing all of the times where Biden has made these gaffes and called people by the wrong name and asked about people who are dead. He claims to have met the guy who invented insulin. He called out someone, I think it was a congresswoman, and she had passed away. And he thought she was there in the audience. And then he's told people who are, handicapped in wheelchairs, hey, you're a great person. Stand up. Let everyone see you. These are not critiques to be harsh or to be mean. It's a legitimate criticism of the man that holds the most important office in the country, the man who is in charge of the most powerful nation in the world, and a man who is going to preside over very difficult, very complicated situations. I don't care who you are, Republican, Democrat, Independent. I want someone competent in the sense that their age isn't limiting them because they are experiencing physical limitations. So he could be a Republican president, and I wouldn't want him to stay in office, mainly because if he's not able to do the job, and if he's having all of these gaffes, which I believe are indicators of his incapability to remain president, I think we should do the world a favor and let him retire.
No, that is definitely something we could discuss. We could definitely discuss with that. Now, granted, I don't think gaps are always an indicator of some poor performance. Like, for instance, George W. Bush said a lot of really good gaps all the time. Like he once said he thought the king negotiate over this peacefully, and that's an actual record for George W. Bush. Bush, he was able to poke fun of him, and you could still see that he was competent. He would just said stupid things by accident. With Biden, he seems like he doesn't even seem to notice when he's saying something stupid and just kind of brushes it off. Um, Now, anyway, back to the candidates, back to the actual candidates themselves. Compare that to Trump. Now, again, Trump says stupid things all the time, and he kind of doesn't always come off very well. But you can still tell what he means for the most part. When he's on script, he's very coherent. He's very presidential, and he has an actual record of being able to get things done and getting things done effectively. Now, there are some issues that Trump has with his term. For instance, that a lot of people really do not like Trump for various reasons. A lot of it is because of the way he was reported. I've been talking to people who to this day think he was directly responsible for the riot that happened at the Capitol building, even though he actively called for peaceful protest. See, a lot of people really do not like Trump, and since he was already president, most people already have their minds made up about what they think of him. Mm-hmm. And yeah, now, the downside is now, unfortunately, with American politics, that's pretty much how it always is. People are always going to have their minds made up about you, regardless of what you actually said or did. Now, which brings me to DeSantis himself. Now, DeSantis is probably the biggest wild card at least the Republican candidates anyway, because he's, in all honesty, I think he's the only one, if he actually enters the race, that has a chance of knocking Trump off the nomination.
Yeah,
because if you look at keep in mind that's with him being in a very distant second to Trump as far as polls go.
Right.
But DeSantis is essentially a hybrid between Trump, Reagan, and Kennedy, where he still has most of Trump's and Reagan's policies. He looks and has the charisma of Kennedy, but he still won't let the media get away with their crap.
Right.
And yeah, however, that doesn't necessarily mean he would do well on the national stage. I mean, a lot of people also already have their minds made up about DeSantis. I mean, a lot of people think that he's a fascist because of a bill that was leaked to the public, where it said in one of the opening statements that you couldn't use the word gay in classrooms, even though no one seemed to mention that was just a very early first draft of the bill that never made it into the final version.
Right.
Yeah. Or the book banning thing, even though most books weren't actually banned, they were just being reviewed to see if they were appropriate.
Right. And I want you to continue with your thought, but really quick, I got to interject. You said that he is the most likely candidate to knock down Trump in the nomination and win the nomination and, get Trump out of the race. I think a lot of the other candidates that are running to get national recognition, and then they would be willing to accept a cabinet position under Trump, potentially, if they are pro-Trump, or if they are more neutral towards him. They know that if they run against him and then they are knocked down, hey, I didn't, go that hard against you or whatever. I'm not DeSantis, so as long as you put me in your cabinet, I'm fine, and I'll step out of the way and I'll endorse you even. So DeSantis seems to be the most likely person to actually want to defeat Trump rather than pretend to fight with him for the nomination, given, and then just want a spot in his cabinet.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally fair assessment. Now, granted, there's only like 4 people who've major candidates who have actually entered the race on the Republican side, and that's including Trump himself. And one of them is actually a former cabinet member of Trump, which is Nikki Haley.
Right.
Yeah, I think the other one is Asa Hutchinson, who is a former governor, I think, of Arkansas, and a guy from Cincinnati whose name I can't even pronounce. So I'm not going to try to insult him by butchering his name here.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
I know who he is, but I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't know what he does. But those are all the major candidates. Now, what you're saying is extremely possible that they could just be looking for national attention so that they could endorse Trump later when they get knocked out of the race or they withdraw and he gives them a cabinet position. I think it would also depend on which cabinet position they'd be going for. I think with Nikki Haley, it most likely would probably be Secretary of State or UN ambassador again, because she really seemed to enjoy that position. I don't know why she resigned, but yeah, that's it's, again, certainly a huge possibility. Now, again, DeSantis again is it's a bit of a wild card since he's basically a young Trump with more political polish.
Yeah.
No,
I heard
now the last
I heard a criticism that said that he needed to be a little bit more personable, in the sense that he needed to be a little less scripted and a little bit more unpredictable, like Trump, in order to kind of garner Trump's base and get their support, because they would see that Trump-esque character in DeSantis, but with all the other positives.
yeah, and that is certainly something that he could do now. Because if you look at DeSantis when he's actually just doing his speeches or something, he doesn't come off as terribly personable. I mean, he kind of does, but he also feels a little scripted because he's basically, you can see him just looking up and down when he's doing a lot of his speeches. He's not interacting with people as much. But granted, again, he's just reading off a script like he's kind of supposed to. But I think that's also one of Trump's biggest concerns personally, because DeSantis is sorry, because like I said, DeSantis is not quite as well known on the national stage because one, he's a local governor, he wasn't the president of the United States.
Right.
But that actually brings me to the last candidate, which is probably the most interesting one, that being Robert Kennedy Jr. Now, for people listening who don't know who that is, his father used to be the Attorney General of the U.S. He also used to be a senator from New York until he was assassinated in 1968, and his uncle is former President John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. is the most interesting candidate, partially because he's the only one running for office right now who has actually never served in public office before, but still comes from a huge political dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
He's considered an anti-vax activist. I'm not sure if that statement is actually entirely accurate. I think he's just against forcing vaccines.
He actually came out against I'm not sure of the specific vaccine, but he was against it because it was linked to childhood autism.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's everything. Yeah. So that could definitely hurt him. He's also a huge environmental activist. And he was an attorney for quite some time. So, but what makes him really interesting is that even though he has less political experience than Donald Trump ever had, even when Donald Trump was running for office, he still has 14% of Biden supporters supporting him.
Mm-hmm.
By comparison, you need about 5% going for you to be statistically significant. And Biden has already lost about a third of his support already. And that's among Democrats.
Yeah, every time I've heard the news covering Biden's re-election run, I keep hearing how they are always interviewing or asking the question or putting out polls, about his among his supporters, and it simply asks, do you want him to run again? And it's always coming back as a higher and higher percentage of people saying no, and even people in his own party have begun to question him.
Yeah. And that's a very serious problem for a president running for re-election, because it does imply that his party might be more divided than anyone thinks. Now, keep in mind, the last time a incumbent president had that much trouble running renomination by his own party was in 1980 with Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter just barely won renomination and I know it's going to sound weird to say on a Christian podcast, but he got his ass handed to him fairly quickly by Ronald Reagan.
Right.
To the point where Carter only won 6 states to Reagan's 44.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think a landslide like that is likely going to happen this time around, but it does show how unpopular Jimmy Carter actually was. And Biden is facing a very similar problem with the same political dynasty. Carter was running against Ted Kennedy. Biden's going to be running against Robert Kennedy Jr. who's already taken 14% of his support away and can chip away at his support a lot easier than any other Democratic candidate who's entered. For context, to be fair, a lot of Democratic candidates have not entered the race. Heck, Joe Exotic entered the freaking race, for crying out loud.
So
for
what
those who
you're
don't know who that
saying,
is, watch my movie. Yeah.
so what you're saying is basically the support for Biden within his party, meaning other political people and or political leaders, people in political power, and his supporters, the regular people, citizens. His support is fracturing among those two demographics, and he's losing support significantly. And like you said, you quoted the percentage that you need a minimum of 5% to be even have a chance. And then Robert Kennedy has already surpassed that, and he's at 14. And then we think about another name I want to throw in here just for consideration is Gavin Newsom. He's doing his America or something tour. And this potentially means that he's gearing up for a presidential run because now he's traveling outside of his state and he's talking to people outside of his state. The only reason you would do that kind of action to get recognition from people not within your state is to get the attention of people on a national scale because you plan on running. So Biden's base is fracturing within his own party, political leaders, and among his just regular people supporters.
Yep. Yeah, and that's going to be a serious problem for him going forward. Oh, hold on a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so yeah, sorry, Robert. I had to accidentally question real quick.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, that's going to be a very serious problem for him because the party's already factoring its support fraction as much as it is. On top of that, you have a guy who's only been there for like 15 seconds and he's already being like 15%, 15% of your supporters. That's a serious problem.
I remember the guy's name that you mentioned. I think this might be his name, and I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but I've heard it pronounced, so I'm just going to repeat what I heard. Were you referencing Vivek Ramaswamy?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I've actually watched a lot of his content. And side note, Vivek Ramaswamy is someone I would actually vote for. I think he's got some really good politics, but he seems more of a independent libertarian type candidate, and he's more of a not old, but some of his rhetoric is not necessarily something that resonates among a larger demographic of people. So I think he's speaking to some very specific, traditionalist and very specific conservatives. So I'm happy that he's making the attempt. I'm happy that he's putting his head in the ring, and anything that can, bring wider conversation to different topics, and his commentary or his contribution to the conversation, I think, is immensely valuable. So I hope he does well, but I don't see him as actually getting the nomination and winning.
Yeah, neither do I. He's too much of an unknown. I didn't even know who the guy was until like 2 hours ago. But anyway, now compare that. Now, like we saying with Biden's support being so fractured, and compare that to Trump's support. Now, the support that former President Trump has, even though it's not 100% of his party, he still has the vast majority of the party behind him, and it's not as fractured as it is with Biden, given how little candidates he has. So now it's also possible that a third party candidate could come around and spoil it for Trump and cause Biden to win. That is certainly is possible, but not very likely.
Right.
Anyway, I think the best course of action, though, for the candidate, for us listening, for us and everyone listening, is to follow the candidates as best you can and try to figure out which one you think represents America's values the best. Because just because you like one candidate more doesn't mean you think they're going to represent the country and its needs really all that will, if that makes any sense.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I would say. No, sorry, go ahead.
No. Were you finished?
Yeah, yeah, I was finished. I was just trying to figure out if I was able to turn here or not.
Okay. So, yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to kind of discerning who you should vote for, one of the most important things is that the media will run interference for the candidate and for the party that they support. And so
Yep.
right now we have a biased media running cover and promoting one person over another. Now, maybe on the flip side of history, maybe when the history books are written, the media will be this shining vessel of, protecting the people against bad candidates and evil people, because that's certainly how they portray a lot of the people on the right. It's certainly how they portray Trump, and I think they're already starting in on that with DeSantis. So my criticism there is the news media, the mainstream media, and the establishment media are extremely biased towards one side. Now, when you look at independent media, oftentimes they are just as biased, but they're more open about it. So if I'm reading a news article that's supposed to be from a journalist or a public publisher that's supposed to be neutral and just reporting the facts, and then they get it wrong, or they omit facts, or they add facts that didn't happen, or even writing a headline that is misleading and is meant to kind of lead you towards one line of thought that doesn't actually align with the events that happened. Basically, them as a filter, they're a bad filter. So I don't believe that you can trust the media to be a filter or a translator of the issues or of the people. The people in the sense of the political candidates. So go directly to the source. You need to watch the White House press briefings. Now, a lot of people don't have time to do this kind of research. They're already entrenched in their beliefs and different things. But if you observe just the natural the raw data without someone taking it and producing something out of it and then repackaging it and then handing it to you with a bias tag attached, I think you can come to some pretty logical conclusions. And the logical conclusion here is I don't want to see a Democrat in office, because obviously I'm staunchly conservative, so I want someone that's more conservative. But I would prefer to get a man who might be suffering health issues out of office just for the sake of humanitarian care. Like, I care about his health. I care about what this will do to him. So I think you have to look at that. Like I said, with the White House press releases, you need to critically question these White House press briefings, and you need to, fact check them or watch people who do. And I think that Don't Walk Runs production, and I've mentioned them once before in this broadcast, but I think he does a pretty good job of showing, hey, look, this is one thing that they're saying, and then this is what they're doing, or this is what we're being told to believe, but is it true when you actually look at the facts or whatever? And I think he brings a pretty fair and balance. Now, you can tell where his bias is, but I think he also still reports fairly. Now, that's important. So try and find your neutral media in just the facts, just the news. But I would even recommend go directly to the source. So watch Biden's speeches, watch his things, and then look at him over a time span. Is he the same person he was years ago? No, because this within his presidency of this term, he signed the Defense of Marriage Act, which keeps which enshrines protections for gay marriage. But before he was president, I don't know if he was still a senator or if he was VP, but he believed that the institution of marriage was between a man and a woman. So he's radically changed his positions. Now, Why would you be concerned with that? Maybe you would say, well, I've changed my positions too, and I'm glad he's changed, and that's why I support him. That's fine, but you need to look at his policies among a consistent standard, and you need to ask, is his standards devolving into a more radical left agenda, or is it staying more center? Because what we were sold is that Joe Biden was a gentle grandpa who was a middle of the road guy who would reunite the country. And I believe that his policies, if you look at what he's done and the kind of legislation that he's passed and the kind of actions he's taken, has pushed us closer and closer towards leftist policies and extreme leftism, bordering on socialism, bordering on these things that are anti-American. So I think you really need to go to the source. Biden, his press secretary, White House press secretary, press releases, and direct things like that. And you also need you need to look at with a critical eye how the media is reporting it and whether or not that's true. And when someone tells you it's not true and you say, well, I saw it on NBC, there are I don't know NBC, for example, I don't know if they specifically have been caught in a lie, but CNN just settled a lawsuit of the Covington. I think it was Covington kids. It might not have been Covington, it might someone else, but they just settled a lawsuit against them. CNN did. They settled a lawsuit against CNN when they reported an incident where supposedly a MAGA supporter was harassing a Native American, and that didn't happen. CNN was sued, and instead of going to court and having to fight it full on in court, they settled and paid out to the people involved. So the point with that is CNN has been caught lying and not telling the truth, and they have misrepresented facts, and they have misled the American public. So when you're listening to these talking heads, these media pundits, you need to have a critical eye, and I extremely want to emphasize going to the source and not letting mainstream establishment media be the filter of how you get your news.
Yep. And for those, let me give it somewhat of a little bit easier to understand demonstration of media bias. So I used this example in one of our previous shows. I don't think it made it into the final version, but I want everyone here to picture the character of James Bond for a second. Now, so I'm just going to ask you, Robert, who do you think of when you think of the character of James Bond? Just humor me here for a second.
I think of Sean Connery.
Okay, Sean Connery. Okay. If you actually read like the actual source material, and this kind of relates to the facts, very little of the actual character survives into any of the film adaptations other than the ones by Timothy Dalton. Like the characterization is different, the personalities are different, even the gun is different for the most part in the first 5 books.
Right, the screenplay is different.
Yeah, like sometimes to the point where the only thing it has in common with the original book is the name. Like for instance, Moonraker in the novel is a nuclear weapon. In the book, it's a space shuttle for some odd reason. But sorry, figure out where this information comes from, because if you didn't read the original facts of these actual news organizations and find their biases, you wouldn't know what perspective you're reading. It's the same thing with the character of James Bond, because if you don't read the original novels, you wouldn't really know that these books are vastly different from the films, or that these characters are vastly different from any or from different screen adaptations, or see how the stories have changed over time. Because like a good novel, sometimes news stories change drastically depending on who's reporting it or who's actually publishing it.
Right.
Yep. So
exactly. So it's like a game of telephone, and by the time it reaches you, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And that's the factor here of media bias. By the time it reaches you, it's like a game of telephone, and it is not the original thing that it was when it started its journey. And so media bias is a problem when getting your news and forming your opinions and your beliefs, and just dealing with facts, because oftentimes the media's representation of what happened isn't based on fact. It's based on emotion, or how to spin it, or how to make the story more excessive in order to get that interest. It's called clickbait. And that's something that you have to be aware of when you're ingesting this information.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think we did a really good job of covering oh, it says 40 minutes left. I thought I got a notification that said it wasn't. Oh, okay, never mind. So I think we've done a really good job of covering these issues. So just to give a recap, I would love for you to give a summary of the topics that we've given so far. I think you started to kind of give a summary, or like a concluding thought in regards to, go out, get your information, and really pay attention to the candidates themselves. But maybe more of a broad summary you can provide, and I'll share my summary. So in regards to the candidates, Trump has his baggage. I believe that he's been marred and smeared by the media. I think that his reputation is really on the rocks. We didn't even get into his legal issues right now. But the short version of it is that if you look at Trump's policies and what he was able to accomplish when he was in office, and the direct positive effects that were experienced by the American people, if you simply make an argument based on those things, I think those things alone should get him reelected. It's a problem of a PR issue of getting that information out there and fighting a biased media. That's why we spent some time on that, because it's important to know there's a biased media, and in this case, they happen to be against the Republican candidate. I haven't seen news coverage that in any way positively covers Republican candidates and conservatives. There's just no love for the conservative party right now. So